On behalf of my co-host, AAE board member and director of professional development, Alicia Scott, it's my pleasure to welcome you to another webinar hosted by the American Association for Employment and Education. Thank you for joining us for today's topic, Expert Insights into Alternative K-12 Certification Options. My name is Tim Newbert, and I serve as AAE's Executive Director. Please allow me to cover just a few housekeeping matters before we begin. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available to AAE members as well as non-members who registered for this event. Attendees are encouraged to post any questions, comments, or feedback using the Q&A or chat features within Zoom. If you or your organization are not a current member of AAE, please visit our website, aaee.org, to learn more about our activities and resources. We are a professional association intent on positively impacting education through professional connections. Related to that mission, we connect the three critical groups involved with the preparation, recruitment, and retention of K-12 educators, that being university professionals and others who prepare and support educators, school system professionals and others who recruit, hire, and retain them, and of course, educator candidates themselves. We offer annual publications such as the Job Search Handbook for Educators. We conduct an educator supply and demand survey each fall and winter, resulting in a spring report. In fact, the deadline for the 2022-2023 survey is Friday, March 31st. We co-host the careersforeducators.com job board with Kappa Delta Pi. We host webinars such as this one on topics relevant to our membership. We sponsor teacher scholarships and mini grants for school systems and nonprofits to encourage and support educator pipelines. We co-host an annual national working group on teacher retention with Upbeat. We host an annual conference and education career expo each fall. Our 2023 event will be held on October 23rd to 26th in Chicago, Illinois. And we are hosting a one-day mini conference on April 11th in Merrillville, Indiana. Check out our website to learn more. Thank you again for joining us for today's panel presentation and conversation about alternative certification programs for K-12 educators with experts on the topic. We're pleased to be joined today by Katie Cruz, Senior Program Manager at Teach South Carolina, Ryan Lamping, Regional Director of Business Development for Educational Services at Maxim Staffing, and Patrick Young, Regional Hiring Consultant and Client Engagement Manager for North Carolina and South Carolina at Teachers of Tomorrow. Thank you all for being here today. Let us begin. And I just realized I'm not sharing my screen. My apologies. All right. Okay. I am sharing my screen, aren't I? There we go. I apologize. All right. So there they all are, at least their names, and hopefully you can see their faces as well. So I'm just going to go in the order that I see you on my screen. So Ryan, why don't you start by telling us about yourself and your company and how it supports the educator pipeline?
Yeah, thanks, Tim, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ryan Lamping. You guys saw the title there. I work for a company called Maxim Staffing. We provide educational staffing services for a multitude of modalities within school districts. I've been with the company for 7 years now. I started off in our local recruitment hub in Cincinnati, Ohio, and have grown in multiple ways to get to my current role. I currently cover the Southeast region of the United States. I have a couple colleagues that cover the Central, West, and Northeast. And our main focus is to be consultants to our local offices and our local recruitment hubs to assist with schools and to be a wider view, in a sense, of what's going on within schools and what's going on within the modalities that we service. And then lastly, with how it supports the educator pipeline question, we really just provide additional staffing support. Our goal is to get immediate staff in the buildings to assist with schools and some of the shortages that we've obviously encompassed within related services, teachers, behavioral support, and nursing. But the long-term goal is kind of where we differ ourselves a little bit in terms of getting a short-term placement, hopefully to become an internal piece of the school district, thus helping to bridge that gap within staffing support and education.
Patrick, same questions.
Thank you, Tim. I'm Patrick Young. I work for Teachers of Tomorrow. In my current role, I service both North and South Carolina. To keep it simple, Teachers of Tomorrow, our vision is to put the very best educators in the classroom. And over the course of our 15 years operating, we started in Texas. That's actually where I started, going on almost 9 years ago to the date. So I've been with the company for a while. I transitioned to serve as the South Carolina program advisor about 5 years ago when we launched that new program. And in my current role for the past year, I've served as regional hiring consultant and client success manager for both North and South Carolina. And again, our vision, just to keep it short and sweet, we want to put the very best educators in the classroom. And the traditional pathway is sometimes fairly limiting. Not everyone has that itch to teach right out of school. And you have those individuals who may want to enter the classroom, but just never had that opportunity or never had what they felt was a good support system or pathway. And that's what Teachers of Tomorrow provides. To address the teacher shortage, especially in light of the pandemic, the past few years, we know that that really slammed schools across the nation, particularly in North and South Carolina. So again, we're glad to service those two states, and we currently operate in 8 states total, with again, our core mission being putting the best educators in the classroom to help teach and instruct future generation. So.
Thank you very much. Katie?
I am Katie Cruz, as was said, and I am the Senior Program Manager for TeachSC or Teach South Carolina. A little bit about me, the majority of my career actually was at the South Carolina Department of Education. So I was there 14 years prior to this role that I've taken on. So that's really sort of where I grew up, and the bulk of my professional career, specifically in the Office of Educator Services. So very, very heavy with certification. And in 14 years, I wore so many different hats, from call center to a certification analyst, actually processing those cases, to recruitment and recognition. So I dealt a lot with international teachers and the sponsorship piece of that process, as well as the Teacher of the Year program in South Carolina, which is quite big, and then moved on to the professional practices side of the house. So quite a lot from A to B in those 14 years there. And then I moved on to do what I do now, which is Teach South Carolina. So that is a partnership from the South Carolina Department of Education and a national nonprofit called Teach.org. And Teach.org sprung out of the US Department of Education trying to tackle this national problem of a teacher shortage. And that started in 2015. Quite a lot of research studying different recruitment efforts to kind of come up with our general game plan. And then we customize that regionally wherever we function. And in my case, that would be South Carolina. And our mission in general is to increase the perception of the teaching profession, to increase the teacher pipeline, and to also diversify it. And they do it so well. And I get to be the lucky person that delivers that to South Carolina and breathes some life into this whole recruitment thing, which I think a lot of us are, at least prior to this, maybe a little tired, a little fatigued going on when it comes to this. And I just get to be the lucky person to help put some fuel to the fire and really try to tackle this issue with so many wonderful partners.
Thank you all very much. Ryan, back to you with this question. What trends are you seeing in educator supply, and how is your company responding to these trends?
Well, I think the obvious trend is that educators are leaving the profession, right? They're leaving schools to find alternative ways, whether that's remote learning or collaboratives or associations of some type that partner with schools for a multitude of reasons. I think most importantly, it's probably pay based, but I think there's a quality of job that I think is hindering that a little bit. One of the things that we've also been able to addressed to a degree from our standpoint is that being a staffing company and having a goal in mind that aligns with a district and that we want to get them to be internal, there's kind of this buffer in between that while they're temp staff, we're able to kind of evaluate them from both the district and an individual level. So we've seen a huge decrease in the amount of burnout and a huge increase in the amount of retention with individuals because of that kind of, I guess you could call it performance area where they are temp staff, right? They make an hourly wage potentially versus a salary, and it allows them to kind of transition into a role rather than stepping foot in a role and kind of getting a rush of or a wave of a bunch of different things and maybe some struggles that are inherent. I think the other thing is support. Myself and my local teams across the country, we are the additional support to a teacher, to a PT, to an SLP or a school psych that can get some additional questions and answers that maybe there isn't the allotted time within a school day to get from other areas and other avenues. So I think that's another way that we've been able to help the immediate candidate and educator, in that we can resolve some of those things immediately. And I think from the district perspective, there are two lenses here. From the district perspective, we're helping to respond to the trend in that we're reducing that gap. I see time and time again, a new article, seems like every day, with additional increases in vacancies with a single school district or within a state with no alternatives. We are somewhat of a bridge to that, where we're not legislative, but we are a talent gap that, hey, we can get qualified individuals in the district, evaluate them from a district and a candidate perspective, hopefully allow some opportunity to potentially work with them over time within the district to be an internal, and thus helping that gap that seems to just consistently be more and more vacancies day by day.
You're Ryan. Patrick, same question to you.
Yes, sir. Well, obvious trend while we're all here is to address the shortage, right? So unfortunately, there is a shortage nationwide. Educators are leaving the profession, and alternative pathways, I feel, are more attractive options, again, for the individuals who may not have entered college knowing that they wanted to graduate with a degree in teaching. They might have worked in industry. You might have been a accountant for 20 some odd years, but always just had that itch to teach. And again, programs like ours are designed to create that pathway to put that individual in the classroom, prepare them for the profession. And this is actually where we picked up. So the elephant in the room, of course, again, is the lockdowns, COVID, the pandemic. We've all been there. We've survived the last 3 years, thankfully. But that took a massive toll on districts, schools across the nation, and especially, again, the states that I service, both North and South Carolina specifically, and again, across the 6 other states that we operate in. It's been a massive hit. And one of the great pivots that Teachers of Tomorrow really got ahead of the curve on was online pedagogy training. I was actually just starting with the company. Again, I've been here for 9 years, but initially we had both options available, where educator had a chance to opt for in-person training, or they could utilize our online platform. And over time, just looking at the data, most folks, they ended up leaning towards the online option because we get it. You know, you have a job. Again, these are second careers for most of the people in our program. And to date, we've issued over 70,000 certs over the past 15 years. So, you know, you get home from work, you pick up your kids, you're not trying to go to an in-person seminar, right? And I don't want to call it serendipity, but in 2020, when we didn't have a choice, when we were stuck in our house, that online format really shined. And a lot of folks we found gravitated to our program. We actually had a boost of enrollment in both North and South Carolina and across our program. So educators, the desire to teach is definitely there. And due to Teachers of Tomorrow's pivot to online training, that platform and that infrastructure that we've built and really invested in over the past, I'd say 7 to 8 years, it really shined brightly throughout the course of the pandemic. In these past 3 years, we've seen a huge uptick in enrollment, and as a consequence, certs being issued. The past 3 years in both the Carolinas, you know, we've experienced, I'd say, not quite double, but around 30% increase of certs being issued. So yeah, responding to the trends, just keeping with the times. It's 2023, you know, and online is a good thing. You know, nothing replaces that tactile. You know, I know you want your hands-on books and sitting in front of a teacher, but again, it's 2023, and luckily, Teachers of Tomorrow has been ahead of the curve with the training aspect.
Patrick. Katie, same question to you.
I love data, so I'm just going to go ahead and straight out say that. One of my old roles at the Department of Education was actually creating that critical needs list. So the geographical critical needs list as well as subject areas. So when I would think about educator supply, I also think about it. Our friend, I think one of my friends is on the call representing Sarah, Jenna Hallman, and their supply and demand report that I've been very mindful of over the years. So a couple of things just sort of come to mind. First and foremost, in South Carolina, we are not unique in having a shortage issue. This is a national problem, and it has been in place for several years. If I was going to give you a presentation, there would be a slide that you would see that would say, we had a problem plus COVID equals crisis, right? So it was just sort of a catalyst to make that problem worse. And essentially, too many leaving, not enough coming in, and we've got a shortage. And this year, we had a 39% increase in shortages here in South Carolina. So that's a pretty big uptick. And, you know, I can tell you, I could give you lots of reasons of just why I know anecdotally what I've heard from teachers of why that could be. But certainly COVID had a lot to do with that, especially for many teachers, this hybrid of being in person and having to do online, that burnt them out quite a lot. And I would just say, and what I know about teachers, anytime that you take away the thing that really fuels their fire, which is that connection with their student, and COVID certainly did that. The thing that they're there for really sort of is a disconnect, and they burnt out really bad in COVID. And one of the things I think we're seeing right now is many of them could not break their contract, right? So, but when it came time to re-up their contract, they chose not to. So certainly a trend that we've seen is within retention. We haven't had enough coming into that pipeline for a while, but we've definitely seen way more leave. And this is a bad cycle, right? Because we need more in, but we need those that are coming in to have some experienced educators to be there, help mentor them along the way and support them. So, you know, there's this sort of magic 5-year number that we really want teachers to stay within. And what we're seeing in South Carolina specifically is that there's less and less staying. Our really, really experienced educators, 20 plus years, really did not stay this last year. And this is just a bad combo, right? Okay, so that's the bad news. That's sort of the want of what Katie has to say about that. But there's other things that I can talk to, especially about what we do here at Teach. When we originally went to kind of say, okay, national teacher crisis, shortage problem, how do we tackle this and do the research for it? What we found is there was a lot of support in place already in many places from the point in which somebody enters the educator preparation program and goes forward. And we sort of looked at this question of, and I certainly thought this too, which was, does nobody want to be a teacher anymore? Is everybody just not interested in actually getting to that educator preparation program? And actually what the data shows us, and even the recent data that we've done here in South Carolina shows us, is there's actually an enormous interest in being a teacher. It's not that people don't want to be a teacher. We are losing them hand over fist though, from the time of like, I think I have this crazy idea to be a teacher. I think this might be my calling, to I've actually now gone on and enrolled in an educator preparation program and I'm on my way. And that is the space where, especially in TeachSC, we fill, and we offer a lot of support within that space. And I could even break that down for you into 10 perceptual things that happen with them that are barriers, and 4 practical things that happen. And those perceptual things, I won't name them all, but they're things like social engineering. Like you say the words, I want to be a teacher, and your parent might have a response to that, or your friends might have a response to that. Or just practical things like, how do I find an education preparation program? How do I choose one? How do I apply, and how do I afford to apply? How do I afford to my actual program itself, the educator preparation program, and how do I prepare and pass those certification tests? Like, those are the 4 things. So a lot of what we do at Teach is a lot of cultivation and that perceptual, changing that narrative, and also doing just practical support with those 4 places where they just sort of, we lose them from A to B. So in terms of supply and demand, and I think I'll save the rest in terms of alt-cert and how that all plays into each other for our next question. But yeah, certainly not enough coming in, not keeping enough. And I think another thing that I would say that came forward in the data that I find surprising is I definitely think that pay especially as a recruitment piece, it's important when you're looking at recruiting people. In terms of retention, it's important in terms of a cost reward system for a person. So we talked about, the additional responsibilities going into teaching, maybe even their working conditions, right? So pay wasn't really such an issue before all of these things were sort of piled on. But the biggest thing that they're saying to us is about their leadership, about the school culture in which they find themselves in. And I can just tell you from traveling around visiting my international teachers, when I did that, that was a huge eye opener for me, just being in all those different schools and classrooms throughout South Carolina. But you can feel when there's a good administrator in place. So you can actually feel that. And I think that that's becoming more and more important as we look at retention, is sort of how teachers feel supported. And there's this other big thing going on as well that I think really contributes to it, which is societally, this disconnect between the school systems and the general public, and the distrust between the two. So certainly, as a lot of us are working on these sort of big, how do we help questions. This is a little out of my lane because I'm mostly in recruitment itself, but really looking at how we can reignite that, create more bridges between the general public and teachers, where there's that trust again between those two, and they really feel like they're working together and not against one another. So that's what I can say about the supply and demand. But honestly, I could talk to you guys about this for probably an hour, and you'd be like, okay, Katie, that's enough. So I'll stop there.
It's a complicated issue, but I appreciate your response. So I did get a question in the Q&A. Someone's just asking if you could briefly reiterate those 4 factors. They would really like to hear them stated again.
Absolutely. And I can even go through the perceptual ones too. So they're sort of in categories of perceptuals. They're in self-connection, like, would I be good at being a teacher? Would people like me in this work? There's emotional connection, like, would I enjoy the work? Would I be aligned with my sense of purpose? That one's a really big one for people, especially career switchers. Would this be intellectually stimulating, and would I grow in my talents? And then there's just pragmatic connections, like, would I like my coworkers, my work environment, et cetera. So those are all the perceptual ones that fall under those 10. And then the practicals, those 4, how do I find an educator preparation program? How do I choose one? How do I apply and pay to apply? How do I pay for my educator preparation program? And how do I prepare and actually pass the certification test? So those are 4 practical. And I could get really deep into how Teach supports that and why we do what we do, and all the data behind that, but we'll save that for another day.
Thank you, Katie. All right. So Ryan, please share your thoughts on how non-traditional pathways can help grow the profession, and how quality comes into play with the different pathways.
Yeah, so from a staffing perspective, I think probably the most obvious answer to this, or from my perspective, would be non-traditional pathways can help to alleviate the gap and the shortage, right? It can kind of put somewhat of a lid on the overflow of people leaving the profession. So non-traditional pathways, in our experience, are sometimes a challenge to us, because again, when we're trying to get, to Katie's point, certification and licensure for individuals, those non-traditional pathways can sometimes be a barrier. So you might have somebody who has a ton of experience or has been in a school environment, maybe a bunch of different capacities. And honestly, again, to what Katie said, they probably worn a lot of hats when they've been in those instances. But because it doesn't meet maybe this black and white metric here, they're not getting licensed and credentialed, and thus can't advance in school. So we see that a lot, and we are somewhat handcuffed. And again, from what the school district wants us to staff, and then what the candidate wants to do, sometimes it is taking a lesser role. So I think that non-traditional pathways can help grow, because you're going to continue to have people who are passionate within education and passionate for students in adolescence to educate them, which obviously is most important in trying to curb this shortage that we have. And then the quality, thus, I think somewhat takes care of itself. One of the things that I see in my regional role is that quality is the biggest factor in all of this. If we staff subpar teachers and we just try to put a Band-Aid on a short-term equation here, we're just adding to the problem. And so what we try to focus on internally is when a district or an individual reaches out to us and says, hey, we need blank modality or blank related service, we do everything we can to get all of the information of what that setting looks like on the front end, so that we can hopefully put that person in the best role. Again, kind of to this non-traditional pathway, they may not want a certain grade level, right? They may not want a certain subject matter. And if we can find that on the front end, I think the quality, the retention, all of that takes care of itself. And thus we have a happier placement. That individual is more likely to stay in schools, and the school district is more happy with the individual that we supplied. So I think overall, the non-traditional pathways can help keep those people who truly are committed within education and really start to truly curb that, even though it might not be the quote unquote quick fix or that Band-Aid approach.
Thank you, Ryan. Patrick?
Yes, sir. So anecdotally, I've spoken with more than one principal, actual school principals, right, who have actually certified through alternative pathways. So the proof's right there. You have different pathways that can branch off from just being the teacher. When you excel in the classroom, you're likely to, find other roles in education. So that's one of the things that I've personally noticed fairly recently in my newest role. But in my prior roles, when dealing with the applicants hand in hand from day one, again, imagine I've had ex-NFL players that are now able to teach PE, so long as you're eligible and you're, again, you're fully eligible to certify. Imagine having an ex-CEO be the business teacher, right? It's really just a matter of giving the individual the opportunity and the pathway to use their experience. And a lot of them just really want to give back, because we've all been in school, right? We all had that one teacher, maybe 2, 3, who knows, but you have that one teacher that really can shift your life and just give you a new outlook and a new perspective. And I won't say that, but you get out of college, you're 22, and granted, you might have that degree, you might go the traditional route. But again, we don't want to leave the individuals who have been immersed in industry doing what they're actually teaching. They have a lot to offer these kids, and again, I think it's a great mix to have not only the traditional pathway that candidate who just graduates 22, 21, and they always knew they wanted to be a teacher, but hey, you might have, again, that 20-year industry veteran in a sense to be able to instruct and guide these kids as well. So that naturally leads into the quality piece of it. Piggybacking off what Ryan said, I mean, if you've been doing it for so long, obviously you have a lot more insight than just a newer teaching candidate. And it also goes into the retention piece that Katie mentioned as well, that magic 5-year number. So that's one of our newest initiatives at Teachers of Tomorrow, where it used to be, it was a hard stop. I've had the pleasure of actually seeing, and this is one of my gold star moments. I love receiving the application into our program and being able to actually issue that final professional licensure after 3 years, or that final in North Carolina, it might be 1 or 2 years, but just being able to see that whole lifeline. But prior to this new initiative that we've started at Teachers of Tomorrow, that's where the road ended. with what Katie mentioned, that 5-year window, now it's really kind of focusing on the retention piece. Because, if they're a great educator, of course, the school wants to hold on to them. We don't want that teacher just saying, oh, okay, well, this was nice, bye. We don't want that. We want them to stay in that classroom, keep providing the service to the kids, so they can eventually become that principal that I've spoken with, who may have started, who knows how long ago, as an ACP or alternative pathway teacher, that have now found their way leading the school. So, quality comes in different forms, but the retention piece is really central to that. You got to keep the teachers, the good ones, in that classroom, and just give them a chance to blossom and grow. And our program is really focusing on that other piece, not just once the cert is issued, but let's continue to provide that support after the cert's issued to make sure you're really staying put on that campus to help those kids.
Patrick. Susan?
So I think right out of the gate, the one thing I want to just say is I know that there is a stigma for non-traditional pathways. And I think there was a question in the chat, so I might address that really quickly too. Non-traditional pathways are pathways to certification that are typically not your typical 4-year institutions, either a bachelor's degree or a master's of arts in teaching, where it includes student teaching that leads to certification. So where I go to, usually a traditional brick and mortar, sometimes online institution, and I get a degreed or, a very formal certification route, and then I get recommended for certification through that pathway and go forward. Usually student teaching is like the real make or break between alternative and traditional there. And alternative certification provides really spaces for typically what we think of as like a career switcher. So the minimum that you sort of need in place to be eligible for non-traditional pathways is a bachelor's degree. And that's sort of why we typically think of them as a career switcher, because typically they majored in something else. Maybe they did a little something else, and then now they're looking back at certification again. So I just want to talk about the stigma that someone who goes through an alternative pathway is maybe not going to be as the same sort of quality teacher or an effective teacher. And that's just not true. You're going to find effective teachers in both spaces, right? Traditional and non-traditional. You're going to find those that are not effective in both spaces. I think what's really important is that really ultimately, and it's something that we really try to do at Teach, is that the right person gets matched with the right type of pathway. And I don't think it's necessarily good or bad one way or another. I think everyone sort of needs their own way of being adequately prepared, and depending on your just uniqueness as an individual, what really works for you, it's going to be different by each person. One thing I can speak to is, at least especially with the career switchers, some of those barriers that we look at, and non-traditional pathways directly sort of meet them where they are at, is they want to be able to have keep a job, have pay, have benefits, right? They need to be able to do this outside of traditional business hours, because most of these people are, grown-ups, they have families, they need to be able to keep putting, food on the table, but they also, more than likely, probably this was in their heart in the very beginning, or maybe they went down this other profession and it just doesn't give them the purpose. It just doesn't give them the thing that they really feel called to do within teaching. And another place, especially, and you kind of touched on this too, Patrick, which is, I used to think about this a lot with my work with international teachers, is a lot of times when we think about diversity or diversifying the profession, we think about, race, and that's certainly important, definitely important. But we can also look at things like what education level you have, what are your life experiences, what kind of career, and and a career switcher, somebody who comes from a different background, is a type of diversity. And one thing we know is when you diversify a team in a lot of different ways, you get better solutions, faster solutions. They work together, they're more creative. So when I think about non-traditional pathways, I also think about bringing a certain type of diversity into the field, that they have this sort of different perspective that they can bring to their students, and that's important too. And I think all of that plays into quality. The other thing that I would talk about a little bit here is, ultimately the way that they help grow the profession is if you have a couple of things. Right away, I can tell you it's a little bit easier to get them in the classroom because they already have the bachelor's degree, so they can meet those students right where they're at and work on that certification in the process. So in terms of shortages, There are more immediate solutions, certainly. And I think the other thing I'd like to just sort of talk about with quality is I think when people start looking at just like throwing numbers against the wall, they think, well, clearly you're going to be reducing quality. And again, I would say that I just think that that's not true. I think that there are good and bad, really well prepared and not prepared from both walks of life. And I know that just from, I can just refer to my teacher of the year, right? And right now, I think about Dion in South Carolina, or many other, district teachers of the year, and the kind of work I knew they were doing. And I saw greatness in teachers that were coming from traditional and non-traditional. And it just really speaks to that different perspective that they have, and that creativity and those different ideas that they sort of bring to that educational world, paired with that purpose. And really the non-traditional pathway meets them there. They allow them to still make a paycheck while they're earning their certification. They allow them to keep benefits. And those are the things that lots of folks are saying, I really want to be a teacher, but this is the thing that's holding me back. So they're able to meet that need and get that person to the classroom and let them fulfill their dream, and really have a quality person in front of that teacher, or in front of that student, because we know how important that is as well. I mean, that's life-changing for these students. And when I think about the teacher shortage problem, I think we focus a lot on not having any more vacancies. To me, that really isn't the end game, right? We want districts to be able to choose between multiple candidates and pick the best candidate for their student. And that matters for literally our whole future as a community, right? Because quality teachers for each of these students is really life-changing in terms of them meeting their potential and what they can go on and do in our community and our state, and really creating our future. We in Teach, we say, be a teacher, shape the future. That's our slogan, and it really does mean that. It's really a chance to be the ultimate influencer in so many ways. And when I think about non-traditional, I just see a meeting of so many needs of those that maybe didn't originally go with that when that was their plan, or maybe they did something else and now they want to take that experience and make it a little bit more purposeful in a different space. So that's what I think about when I think about non-traditional pathways and the quality that they can really bring.
Katie, appreciate that. So we got a question in the Q&A, and I again remind all of our attendees, you are welcome to post questions in Q&A or in chat, and be happy to share them with one or more panelists. I'm going to share this with all of you. So I'm going to start with Ryan and ask you. So Andrea says, we found that our non-traditional teachers struggle with behavior management in the classroom. What are your organizations doing to make these teachers more prepared for the in-person classroom experience?
Yeah, I would say from a staffing perspective, I'd probably zoom out from just even non-traditional to just all candidates from a Maxim per se, or a staffing solution. I think what we try to do is we are very specific to the district and the needs there. So we don't have per se, like we have our policies and such, but we're getting the information from the school to staff them. That way that person walking in is adequately credentialed, they have the requirements, they know what's going on. We also advocate for, somewhat of like a training day per se, a PD almost, of, hey, do you need the person to stop by before their first day to get acclimated? And I think when we do that, we've seen a much better interaction from day one without maybe some of those hiccups walking into an in-person, walking into some of those behavioral situations. We usually try to find that on the front end so we can evaluate it. One of the other ways we do it is through multiple interviews. I think sometimes one of the shortages we have, and some of the shortcomings of education and staffing right now, is there's a lot of virtual stuff being done, especially from a vendor standpoint. That can be the start of an interview, but we actually prefer a second or a third round to be in person to help alleviate exactly what the question's asking. Maybe some of those in-person shortcomings. You walk in a building, you see the situation, hey, that's probably not for me, or hey, it definitely is, right? You can see it a lot better and feel a lot better when you're there versus just being virtual. So kind of touching on, yes, the non-traditional is great, but I think once we get that out of the way and know virtual may be something that we have to alleviate or talk through, getting there in person can help to strengthen either the want or the, hey, I don't need to go there, right? Or hey, this isn't the right fit for me in an interview process.
Thank you, Ryan. Patrick, any thoughts?
Absolutely. And Ryan, you mentioned the main thing. I'm putting my program advisor hat back on. But yeah, my number one tip for anybody going into the profession has always been, and a lot of states, keep in mind, they have a requirement for field-based experience, whether it be 30 hours of field-based experience to obtain a licensure. And again, that varies state by state, but me personally, as a program advisor, I was telling folks, hey, you might want to substitute a little bit. You might want to volunteer. If you have a kid, make sure you're present on the campus. Get a feel for the campus that specifically what Ryan mentioned. You might want to check out that school you're thinking about going to, right? If you've earmarked a particular campus, really check it out. You know, volunteer a couple of days, or you might as well get a paycheck if you can substitute. I mean, you're helping these schools need assistance. And on the other side of that, when it comes to behavior management, again, with our program having switched to an online format, we feel it does a pretty good job, but of course there is no substitute for really being on campus in that classroom, no substitute. So again, as a program advisor, what I trained my other program advisors who've also been in the program, you always want to encourage folks, make sure you get out there. If you really want to prepare them for the profession, nothing replaces being on that campus with those kids. That way you can utilize the stuff you're learning online. And as a program, of course, we have multi-tiered support, meaning us as program advisors, where I'm talking to you every day if you need questions answered. But when you're actually teaching, we have field supervisors. So our classroom support department, these are educators with minimum of 10 years experience. They've all been teachers of the year. They've all been teachers for quite a while. And these are the folks that will come and visit your campuses at least 3 times a year during that initial year. The school, they also assign, if you can imagine, most every first year teacher, you know, you have a lead teacher or something like that. So you have not only the teacher on campus, but you have from our program, a field supervisor who will come out and visit you. We've also bolstered that support with, again, it's 2023, so we have virtual observations as well to kind of fill in the gaps. If you feel like you need some additional support, Teachers of Tomorrow will give you all the resources available. We have online videos where you can kind of look at classrooms, and it'll give you quizzes on, hey, what would you do in this scenario? But again, nothing replaces getting on that campus, getting in front of those kids, because all the training in the world, it may go out the window when you're sitting in front of those kids. So that's my main advice for folks looking to go into the profession. Make sure you get in the classroom and apply the training you're receiving in real time.
Thank you, Patrick. Katie?
I'm pretty much going to echo what the gentleman said before me. So at Teach specifically, one of the things that we really do is look at groups that have already had that experience, especially any volunteers that are in the school or school-based personnel. That's a group that we really seek to try to support and actually going on becoming a certified teacher. But outside of that, I would say that we house a lot of resources that talk about sort of trying on teaching, right? So usually we look at groups that we know sort of already have an interest in kids or that connection, like Boys and Girls Club or just all different types of walks of life. But essentially we give them a lot of resources and information of the opportunities to try on teaching, essentially before they make that decision. That's part of that cultivation part that I talked about of making that decision to become a teacher. Is there are tons of fellowships, there are lots of opportunities, volunteerism, where they can get in the classroom and just sort of get their toe wet and see what it's like and get a little bit of experience under their belt. I will also just say this, in my own work with the international teachers coming totally from a different culture, this was something that came forward too, behavioral, being able to manage the behavior within the classroom is just so different. Something that is just so incredibly important, and it goes back to that importance of us really working on that retention piece, is that they have a strong mentor and they have a strong administrator or leadership in place in their classroom too, because that's really going to be important for them to have that in place. And, you know, that's one of the really difficult sort of catch-22s that we're in right now with the shortage and how much turnover we've had, is that support for that brand new teacher is just so important. And remember, non-traditional is coming with a whole different sort of toolkit. They've got a different toolkit than that bachelor's degree, right out of their traditional program looks like. So it doesn't necessarily, this is maybe one of the things that's going to show up right away, right? Like if I have behavior management problems in my classroom, my administrator is going to know about that like today. Whereas maybe if I'm an ineffective teacher, that might show up down the road, right? So they're coming with a little tool set, but there are some places where they need a little bit of help and assistance, just like any other brand new teacher who comes with their own little tool set and they need help in other ways. But those are the biggest things I would say is I think the ability to sort of get in the school setting or try on teaching in these and work with kids in different spaces or levels to sort of understand and not just have this happen overnight. I think honestly, the individual has a lot to do with it too. I mean, some we see get thrown in that classroom and they just fly. They can just fly. And others need that support. And we see that in traditional programs too. It's just that sometimes that shows up in that student teaching place where they either pass or fail that, at that stage. So yeah, that's really important. And honestly, at the end of the day, that mentorship, having a strong mentor who still loves their profession, I think that's really important too. And that strong administrative support, those are all so important in getting after, that piece for that teacher.
Thank you, Katie. And Kate, and I think Alicia has a question.
Yes. Well, and I want to say too, you guys are kind of supporting recruiting for the districts, right? Katie's looking at getting people the correct pathway in order to become a teacher. Patrick, you're representing our alternative certification. So people who have a bachelor's degree but are looking at becoming an educator. And then Ryan, you're looking at those teachers who were in a district or already have certification, and we need to figure out how to support those and get those folks back into the districts. And so kind of the question is for you, Ryan, is what kinds of teachers are you seeing come into contracted services and leaving the districts? And what reasons are they finding contracted services more comfortable for them than maybe remaining in a district?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say the plain answer is all categories, right? Like I think it's been an increase in all, but if we're looking at where it's increased the most, I would say it's going to be your highly tenured folks that have been in education for a long time. They've been around the block, so to speak, and they've seen the ins and outs of it, the good, bads, and uglies, and they know, hey, I can take this other approach here and maybe gain some areas where I didn't have it before. And then I would say the new population of teachers coming out of school are probably the two biggest areas of increase. I think the newer individuals, the new grads, are one that we see a big jump start with because, again, they're younger. They don't maybe have some preconceived notions of what school needs to look like and what educators need to look and do, right? We get that question a lot, like, why would I go with a staffing company versus you all? And then us explaining to them, hey, this is a way for you to kind of evaluate this position, get a feel for it, see if it's going to be a good fit for you long-term. The district does the same thing. And hey, if they marry up, great. But if it doesn't at the end of the school year, awesome. We're going to go try and find you another district down the way that can help out too. So to answer the individual question, I would say it's the very tenured folks and the very new folks. And then what we're offering that maybe allows them to have that variance. One, I'd say the support, right? Like they feel very strongly that having a company that employs them through Maxim, even though they work at a district under their guidance, is an extra layer of support that very plainly they don't have right now in a lot of cases. So I think that's one big one. The other one I would say would be financial benefits, right? There are a lot of cases where we're offering incentives alternative to what a school does outside of that, right? It's a very short term. I think society has kind of merged into this very short-term way of thinking in the last decade, right? And temp staffing kind of evolves into that, where it's like, hey, for this year, we lived in a COVID world where it was day-to-day thinking almost. Hey, for this very short term, I can do this job, get paid more money for it, and reevaluate things at the end of the year, or continue it further internally if I really like it. I think for most cases, that's where people are drawn to. And there's just the options piece of it too, I would say, lastly. I think in a lot of ways, educators feel like they're on an island when it comes to finding a new position, right? They're looking at the typical job boards and the typical school sites and the typical areas of looking for new positions where they could call a company like us and we can give them the scope of what it looks like within the state or within the geographic region they want to be in. Or, hey, if you want to actually travel, we can assist with you finding a placement 5 states away. That's something unique that districts just very plainly don't offer. So hopefully that answers your question, Alicia.
Thank you.
Ryan. So we have another question in the Q&A, and I'm not sure if all of you would have something to say to this, but I'm going to start. Katie, I'm going to give you first option. I know you got a hard stop here in a few minutes. What training, if any, is provided to mentors to support the teachers they are working with? How often do they meet with their teachers? And again, I don't know that this is a question that applies to all of you, but Katie, I'll give you the first option nonetheless.
Yeah, this will be a space where I put on my old department hat, not necessarily my peace hat. I would say in our state in particular, there is sort of a review process where in the very beginning of your first year, you're assigned a mentor, you guys call it depth and you go through this process. So there's a formal process with that. But also as a state, we've also invested in micro-credentialing, especially in this particular area of mentorship, and providing essentially train the trainer, getting them prepared to be that mentor. And I think the really important thing that I've seen, especially as, teachers in a desire that they have as they develop in their career, is to take that experience and be able to utilize that in sort of in a leadership role. I think honestly, a missing piece in that though is to compensate for those additional efforts, to be able to have the funding to be able to do that and to recognize those additional efforts. But there is a great desire, I think, for experienced teachers to take their expertise and help send on the next generation. But in terms of what is actually here today, we have that process built into our evaluation system. And there's also a lot of training through the state's Office of Educator Leadership to help support and prepare those mentors to go on and take on that role, as well as micro-credentialing. And for them, that goes into their renewal credit. So there is a little bit of help with that process. But according to Katie, the world according to Katie, which we don't know how effective that would be, if I had a magic wand, I would see them see a little bit additional compensation for those additional efforts as well. I think that's really just something that we see in general in the teaching profession, is they have taken on all these other roles. We either need to give those other roles to the appropriate person and not the teacher, or we need to compensate them for those additional efforts and things that they're doing is outside of just teaching, which is a lot in of itself.
Ryan or Patrick?
Absolutely. So our classroom support department, basically every teacher in our program, our goal is to give you at minimum 3 visits from our field supervisor. And again, that's an individual from our program who is designated to reach out to the teacher to provide that additional support. Again, 3 visits minimum, it may be more. Perhaps due to the timing of when you get the cert, we might have to pick up a couple on the other side of the school year. But the great thing about our field supervisors is minimum 10 years of experience for every single one of them. One thing that I've noticed, once an educator, always an educator. So a lot of the field supervisors that I've seen, they're retired teachers, and maybe due to COVID, it kind of pushed a lot of those individuals out, unfortunately. And now they're still finding, they still have that itch to educate it. And now they're able to serve in a different way, not necessarily in the classroom, but they're helping out other educators to lend that knowledge that they've had over there. I said 10 years, but we're really talking 20 years, sometimes 30 years of experience with our field supervisors. And it's a pretty robust team. And as far as the mentors go, kind of like Alicia had mentioned, on campus, you have lead teachers, those sorts of things as well. We also try to pair our teachers with that individual as well. So not only do you have support coming from our side, where again, minimum 3 times a year, but you also have that on-campus support as well. And as far as training is concerned, one of the other cool things about Teachers of Tomorrow, not a plug for job seekers out here, but we pay our field supervisors. It's an additional revenue stream for some of these individuals. Again, you might have a retired teacher, and not only are they still able to educate, just in a different way, but hey, they're earning a little change on the side for doing something that they love when they thought the door might have been closed. So yeah, it's just the finding quality supervisors and mentors is definitely a huge piece of this puzzle as well, especially as it goes into the retention piece. Because if these newer teachers aren't getting the support that they need to be successful in the classroom, of course, they're going to fizzle out and burn out. And we really want to avoid that. And we mitigate that by giving you quality field supervisors to help you on campus. And they have access to them whenever they need. They have emails and, they talk, and yeah. So that's a huge piece to Teachers of Tomorrow.
Thank you, Patrick. Ryan, any thoughts from your side?
Yeah, I would just keep it brief. I mean, we don't necessarily have a mentee in our business model, right, for a staffing company, but I think that support system that we offer is somewhat of the mentee or quote unquote consultant. We're going to take the feedback of whatever a educator has, and we're going to go right to the district with it to see if there's some way we can work through it, whether that's a positive interaction, a negative one we need to alleviate. So I wouldn't say a mentee per se, but I do think there's definitely support there that overlaps.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all so very much. Again, audience, this is Katie Cruz, Ryan Lamping, and Patrick Young, and we so appreciate all of them. And Alicia, thank you for your co-hosting assistance and support. And thank you everyone for attending. And we will, as said at the beginning, this session was recorded and will be made available to you in the